Okay, next file we're going to look at is bazelrc. And for this, I will open up our project in Visual Studio Code because it's going to be a lot easier to look through files than what we've been doing in the terminal so far. All right, and here's the bazelrc file, which contains a bunch of flags. So let's talk about flags under Bazel for a minute. Bazel has a ton of command line flags. Probably a mistake that it has so many. Even experts are routinely surprised to learn of one that they haven't heard of. I'm learning new flags all the time. And some of them have the wrong default value. It's a very long, arduous process to actually flip the defaults because they can be breaking. And it's just difficult inside of Google 3, Google's monorepo, to accept new default values. Flags are passed to Bazel on the command line. So you can run Bazel and then pass -- some flag. So jobs equals 10, for example. Flags can have a short version. So some of them can be abbreviated, essentially, ones that are run commonly. So -- compilation _ mode is abbreviated with just -c because it's used a lot in C++. You can also stick the word no on the front of a flag if it's a Boolean flag to negate it. So if you want to turn a flag off, instead of -- something equals false, you can just say -- no that thing. Since there's so many of them, we don't want to have to remember them. We don't want to have to type them. As much as possible, we want them to just be set for us. And that's where these RC files come in. There are 4 locations that the RC files appear. One is a system-wide file. You almost never touch that unless you're configuring CI or something. Then there's a file that's checked into the repository that we're looking at right now. You can see at the bottom of this file, there is a try import that points to user.bazelrc. This is a trick that we're using to allow you to also have your own preferences for this repo that are going to live in your project, but are going to be git ignored. If you want to have preferences personal to you that apply to all of the repositories on your machine, those can go into a bazelrc file that lives in your home directory. So that's the 3rd location. And then, of course, the 4th location is inside of this user.bazelrc file. In this case, we don't have one of those yet. And that's why this uses try import, because the file doesn't exist. But if it did, it appears at the end of the file. And so these flags are basically processed. Last one wins. And so if you put something in that file, it will override anything that appeared before it in this resolution scheme. These lines at the beginning are importing a bunch of presets. This is a concept that Aspect has introduced to try to group flags and make it easier. So for example, performance.bazelrc, we can go take a look at what's in there. And it has a few flags that we recommend turning on to make Bazel faster. These are flags which I think just have the wrong default value. And there's so many flags that we never want to have to look in these preset files. There's a clever little scheme here where we have a Bazel target that's actually going to keep these RC presets up to date. And we get those from Aspect Bazel Lib, which is a project we donated to the Linux Foundation. So if you have any other flags that you think belong in these files, please send us a PR and let's keep these presets all organized together. Okay, final thing to say about the RC file is that this line 23 has a special syntax, common : release. So to explain what these mean, let's start with the common part. So a bunch of these lines say common. That is, which Bazel commands does this flag apply to? And common is a special value that means apply it to any command for which this flag is legal. That's basically always what you want. But if you needed to have flags apply only to Bazel build, but not to Bazel test for whatever reason, then you would put build at the beginning of the line to specify which Bazel commands the flags apply to. Then there's : release. And this is a grouping mechanism that says, don't turn this flag on by default, but if I pass -- config equals release, I'm going to use that as a shorthand, which means turn on any of these bazelrc lines that are tagged with release. So that gives us a nice way to group flags. Let's say maybe you would have some that are under a tag called debug or a tag called CI. Now you can put flags in this file that don't appear by default, but can be selected very easily from the command line with this -- config flag. So that's it for RC files. Of course, there's more depth. You can read about them in the bazelrc guide on our doc site.